There is growing concern around the country that we are now facing a meat shortage. The reporting, and we had this in our daily commentary up on ToddStarnes.com. There are reports that Kroger, which is the nation's largest grocery store chain, Kroger is now limiting the number of packages of meat that you can purchase. We're talking about beef and pork. Costco is also limiting beef, pork, and chicken. So I think it's 3 items per member at the Costco. And I'm curious what's happening in your local supermarkets. Is this something that's happening nationwide, or are we talking about just pockets of meat shortages? Give us a call, 844-747-8868, a toll-free number nationwide, 844-747-8868. The shocking news, Wendy's, remember the old TV commercial, "Where's the beef?" with the old ladies, "Where's the beef?" Well, now people are literally wondering where the beef is, because there are some Wendy's restaurants in California, South Carolina, and Kentucky that are no longer serving hamburgers. All you can get is the chicken sandwich, maybe the nuggets, which are pretty good, and the Frosty, which is delicious. Well, on the Newsmaker line to talk about all of this is the man who predicted this was going to happen when everybody else laughed. Congressman Thomas Massie, always good to have you on the program. Hope you're doing good, sir.
I'm doing great, Todd. And since I spoke to you last, I actually hauled 2 of my cattle to a processor. And that was an instructive trip. They are so backed up at this USDA processor that you can't get a cow there until August, and they won't even schedule you. They won't even put you on the calendar now. And here's the irony of those meat shortages that you're seeing. Right now, there are thousands of hogs, slaughter-ready hogs, that are being shot and buried or disposed of, not going into the food supply. And it's not because farmers are mean. I mean, sure, they'd love to keep these animals until the processors open back up, but the reality is these hogs have a certain lifespan, and there's new baby pigs being born every day, and you got to make room on the farm. So that's the irony of this situation, and it's avoidable. I've been talking on your show about it for weeks. I've been talking in general for 5 years. 5 years ago, I introduced a bill when I saw that all of the meat processing had been captured by 4 multinational corporations. One of them's Chinese, one of them's Brazilian. They operate here in the United States and process 80% of all the meat. And I said, this is a problem.
So let me get this straight. Not only are the Chinese producing most of the ingredients we need for our medicine, you're telling me that 2 of the 4 major meat processing plants are owned by international companies.
That's right. And they're operating right here in the United States. And the other thing that happened in 2015 that caused me some concern is they took country of origin labels off of beef and pork. Now, they left them on all of your vegetables and your shoes and your cars and your tools and your phones and your fish, but they took the country of origin label off of beef and pork.
Why do you think that was, Congressman?
Well, it's because these multinational meat processors, they want to bring in animals from Mexico, slaughter them here in the United States, slap a USDA sticker on it, and tell you it's USA meat, but it's actually Mexican animals processed in Chinese factories with American workers, and then people think they're eating USA meat.
You know, Congressman, when people hear about globalism, and you hear a lot of Republicans talking about, we need to be a global society. This is what globalism looks like in reality. And now, quite frankly, it's very possible that America could be held hostage by some of these countries, especially if this, whatever this is, global pandemic continues to drag on through the summer and into the fall. You really wonder what the country is going to look like.
Well, here's the other thing, Todd. It's not just a hardship for consumers. There are a lot of farmers who are going bankrupt right now. And the Chinese are buying farmland. And they're also the processors who happen to be the kink in the pipeline that's causing the farmers to have to euthanize these animals. And so, I mean, the incentives are all wrong here. And that's why I introduced a bill called the Prime Act 5 years ago. I've reintroduced it twice. I introduced it a year ago, so it's currently valid in this Congress. There's also a Senate version that has 4 senators on it. But my Prime Act would allow mom and pop American processors, and most of them have been regulated out of existence, but there are some that still exist who can process meat for the farmers who want to eat their own meat, but they can't legally sell that meat in supermarkets because they've been regulated out of the market. And the big meat processors, the multinationals that control 80% of the market, they love these regulations because they keep the little guys out of the market. So what my bill does is it says, look, if your farmer, your processor, and your grocer are all in the same state, if you're not putting this meat in interstate commerce, if it's all intrastate commerce, then get the USDA out of it and just let the states regulate it and the local health departments.
You know, Congressman, we're getting lots of reports about dairy farmers giving away all of this milk because they don't know what to do with it, so they're giving it away to their community. Where do you say you mentioned the farmers having to declare bankruptcy? I mean, how much longer is the country going to be able to survive this? I'm not getting some. I'm very concerned about not just the middle part of the country, but if these big cities refuse to reopen, that is going to wreak havoc on our economy.
Oh yeah, and this is not a short-term problem. Look, when I went to the meat processing facility last Thursday with my own cattle, I had to wait while some guy unloaded dairy cattle to be processed into beef. Now, some of that happens normally because dairy cattle get old, but these look like dairy cattle that were in their prime. And, when you slaughter a dairy cow, it takes 3 years to replace a dairy cow. They have to grow up, they have to have a baby before they get their milk. So what's happening now is going to have implications 3 years from now in the dairy market, but it's also going to have implications 3 months from now in the pork market. People are, you see politicians in the news say, oh, it's all good, we fixed the problem. They haven't fixed the problem. Sows, that's a mother hog, pig, are aborting. The farmers are giving them injections so that they abort the piglets, and then they're not breeding them back. Now, you can't grow a piglet into a hog overnight. And so what they're doing right now is rational for the farmer, right? That's more humane than feeding an animal and then putting it in a landfill. But what they're doing now will have implications 3 months from now. And likewise with chickens, they are not hatching the eggs that would become the chicken wings at your restaurant or in your supermarket, and that's a 12-week process. So that's a kink in the pipeline that's going to last 12 weeks. The one for hogs is going to last several months, and for cattle, it's going to be the biggest effect is going to be among dairy cattle that are now being put into the beef processing.
So we're talking about milk for your cereal, maybe in short supply down the road. We're talking about no chicken wings down at Buffalo Wild Wings. We're talking about maybe an egg shortage. We're talking about no cheeseburgers. I mean, Wendy's has already stopped serving beef in some of their restaurants. Is that what we're talking about here, Congressman?
Now, that's what we're talking about, but here's what I think is going to happen. Americans are not going to go hungry. They'll just have limited selections. You'll feel like you're in Soviet Russia. You'll go down to the supermarket to buy chicken, and they'll say all you can have is a pound of beef. But eventually what they'll do is, and I think you mentioned globalism, they will use this as an excuse to import meat, and they're already doing it from Africa, from countries we've never imported meat from countries where you think they need their own food. But the reality is the American consumers can pay more. And we've already gotten rid of the country of origin labeling in 2015. I fought that tooth and nail, but it still passed because World Trade Organization and GATT. And so anyways, what I predict is to ameliorate these shortages, there's going to be an influx of foreign meat, even though those other countries honestly need their own meat.
I'm not sure I want to eat another country's meat like that. I mean, again, how do we fix this? Is there a quick fix to this?
Well, the Olympics, they advised athletes that traveled overseas to like Mexico and China not to eat meat there because they could fail a steroid test. Now, the steroids are illegal in Mexico and China, but that doesn't mean they don't use them. So that's one thing that it means.
Congressman, what is going on here? What is going on in our country right now?
Well, you've got legislators who are captive to the big meat lobby. You've got entrenched bureaucrats at the USDA that, frankly, they're unwilling to change any single regulation. They'd rather see people starve as to remove any regulation. And then you've got some legislators who are unconcerned about this. Now, the good news is I've picked up a dozen co-sponsors in the House on the Prime Act this week alone. And it's a bipartisan, bicameral. There are Democrats, there are Republicans on this bill. And so there is some hope for getting this passed. We need to get the president's attention. To ameliorate the shortage in meat, he told the processors that, to reopen. And what that did is that absolves them of some of the liability toward their workers. Now, the irony is he's telling American workers you can't sue the Chinese factory you work at if you get COVID-19 there. I believe there does need to be some lawsuit immunity, but it needs to be distributed uniformly across all businesses. The hairdresser needs some immunity, right? The McDonald's needs some immunity. The hardware store, the locally owned hardware store needs some immunity from liability. But the president just sort of by executive order gave the immunity to these multinational meat packers so that they would open back up in spite of the fact that their workers seem to have about 10 times the prevalence of COVID-19.
Congressman, real quick here to wrap it up, and we could go on for another hour. I'm just fascinated by this. We asked a question earlier on in the program about whether or not people were getting the inkling that some of these Democrats in leadership in the State House are actually okay with these quarantines going on indefinitely. I know that sort of may sound outrageous, but are you starting to feel that way?
Well, I'm calling Nancy Pelosi a last responder. There are first responders and then there are last responders. She's a last responder. They are inactive right now. They're not at the front lines. You can't even find them right now. They're sitting at home eating ice cream. We need to get to work. She needs to call Congress back in session. They told us, Steny Hoyer and Nancy Pelosi said, we'll call you back in session when the bill's ready to vote on. Well, if we're not there, who the hell's writing the bill?
It's a good question. It's a fair question. All right, the Prime Act. Congressman, what do people need to do listening to the program right now?
They need to make 3 phone calls. Everybody has 2 senators and a representative. Don't call somebody else's senator. Don't call somebody else's representative. Call your own. Tell them to sponsor the Prime Act. Tell them you don't want meat shortages and you don't want animals being wasted in landfills.
Well said. All right, Congressman, thanks for fighting the good fight. You always have a platform here on this radio show.
Thank you, Todd.
All right, Congressman Thomas Massie, one of the few, and I mean few, lawmakers up on Capitol Hill willing to stand up and say what needs to be said. This man, folks, I kid you not, this man has been sounding the alarm on these shortages for weeks now, and no one wanted to pay attention. Well, guess what? They're paying attention right now. They absolutely are.